think one of the interesting things about how you talk about China and the environment is that the environment does tie into the economy and many other ways in a very real, tangible way. So, uh, tell us about that because I thought China was, it's a very green country. They're making all of this solar panels. They're going to be carbon neutral by 2060, they say. So China's doing great on the environment, right?
No, that's just part of the Chinese narrative that they're trying to sell to gullible outsiders to avoid criticism, avoid having to do anything really meaningful about addressing their environmental problems. So I'll just sort of give you some background to get us started, and feel free to interrupt me and dig in on certain things. China's a big country, has a lot of people, always has had a lot of people. And let's start with water. Water is very important. If you're going to feed now a billion plus people, it takes a lot of grain, a lot of rice, a lot of other things. But this has always been the case in China, going back thousands of years. They've always had a robust population, and they've always needed a lot of water for feeding that population. So there are records going back 3,000 years about building dikes, building water transfer, irrigation type projects. The Great Canal, the so-called Great Canal, which connects the south to the north, because the two major rivers in China, and in between are the growing areas, especially up north. So this north to south canal was built 1,500 years ago originally, and they keep trying to improve it. But so let's fast forward to the modern era, the communist era. Mao wanted to industrialize the country, and he wanted to be self-sufficient in grain. So they speeded up their efforts to build irrigation canals. They speeded up their efforts to get water from the south to the north. There were three reasons really for building lots of canals and in the modern area dams. I mean, they had the traditional problem of flooding. I mean, on the Yangtze River, there's a famous flood in the 1930s, killed 4 million people. So there's that. They needed to get water for urban areas as it became industrialized, and they needed water, massive amounts of water in the central and northern parts of the country to grow grain, basically. And eventually, as they became a little bit richer, grow enough grain to feed cattle so that they could have meat. So they would do things like in the 50s, you all know about the Great Famine in the late 50s. Well, Mao had decided that he wanted to industrialize pretty quickly. So he's trying to build steel forging and mills all across the country. So they cut down all the trees in China to feed those, and they used corvée labor, basically slave labor, to build a massive number of irrigation dikes. There's an interesting factoid that when they were trying to use manual labor, because they didn't have the machinery yet in the 1950s to build canals, dikes, roads, dams, they used basically manual labor. And in one period in the mid-1950s, they enlisted, hundreds of thousands of people. they moved, they claimed, enough rock and earth to build a highway 100 feet wide and 3 feet deep from China to the moon. That's a lot of material they did with human hands. Anyway, so they industrialized, they urbanized, they needed to get water to both urban populations and to the agricultural sector. They have this north to south water project, which moves, last one of the statistics I saw, 25 million cubic, 25 square kilometers of water from the south to the north, which I can't do the math. It's a lot of water. So there's that. In the course of this, they, for instance, use a lot of fertilizer to irrigate lands in the north. They used too much. They irrigated too much. Something like 20%, 15 to 20% of their land that's available for growing crops is been basically ruined by overuse of irrigated water and fertilizer.
So they're using like chemical fertilizers that are damaging, or what?
Yeah. Their productivity of their agriculture is 30-40% below Western agricultural output.
Why is that?
Like that's way
that's
lower.
Really different.
Well, the quality of their water is pretty bad. 80% to 90% of the groundwater in China is unsuitable for human consumption. There's a historian of the ecology of modern China who says a lot of the lakes and some of the rivers look like green paint because they're so polluted. So you have these huge internal pollution problems. What else?
So if the 80% of the water is not safe for human consumption, groundwater.
But that's a big problem if the groundwater is polluted.
Right, but you also you can't or shouldn't be using that for crops, right?
Well, they think it's suitable for crops. Are
they right?
Use.
Well, I know, even in the U.S., there are different standards for water safe for human consumption and water that you put on the field.
Right.
But it's sounding like because of how polluted the water is, they might be stretching. They're not using the same standards the U.S. is using.
Right.